Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. All right. All right, we're just letting everyone get in here. Hey, Bob, good morning. All right, Emma, seems like we have everyone.
I think we got a critical mass. We can go ahead and begin.
All right, guys, I'm sorry for my camera quality. I'm at home and not in the either the district or DC office. I had some plumbing issues this morning, so that's been my morning, and I'm in my basement. In any event, I'm really excited about this. I won't talk long. Just want to thank all of you for jumping on and for being part of this process and all of the work that you're doing. You're on here most likely because you're part of a community project or one of these big investments that is making a difference or will be making a difference for our community, and we want to be helpful. So this is a overview of what we know to be true about the community funding project funding process, and I'm going to hand it over to Chris Dalton in a minute. Chris is our Deputy Chief of Staff. He's in Washington. He is on the phone with appropriators, their staff, on a regular basis to really understand ultimately what appropriators will take in terms of community projects and which ones will likely get funded. So as we go into this year, two things. One is we wanted to make sure that we got in front of this process a little bit better than we did last year because we had just been sworn in. And we were, trying to figure out where the copier was. So those now we've got a year under our belt and know a lot more. Two, we have folks from the Appropriations Committee to help us talk through this, and so we're gonna go through the process. I'll tell you on what we submitted last year. We submitted 15 projects. And it was a lot of going back and forth with the committee to see what would be funded, what would be rejected, those kinds of things, so that ultimately we would get to a place where the 15 projects, you can submit up to 15. All of our 15 projects were included in the budget. Obviously, the key now is to get that budget to the floor and get it passed. And there's still hope. There's still hope that in March we will, or in the next few weeks, we will be voting on budget bills and passing a budget, which will include the 15 projects and about $15 million in investments that will come back to Southwest Ohio. So with that, Chris, is there anything else you want me to talk on the front end?
I think that's it. I can go ahead and take it from there.
All right, guys, I'm going to go off camera. I will be back and forth as I resolve, what is a minor plumbing issue in my house. It's a sink related issue. So, all right, Chris, all yours.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Hi, everybody. My name's Chris Dalton, as Greg said. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff at our DC office. I focus heavily on the appropriations and community project funding process. I know many of you, have spoken with many of you, and look forward to working with you on this upcoming year's community project funding process. So this webinar, I'll be speaking primarily. We'll have an opportunity to take questions at the end. I am joined by two of our friends from the House Appropriations Committee to share more information that is not in this webinar, or just answer some questions that maybe I don't have the answers to. I'll start off by saying the community project funding process does change from year to year. So the information I'm presenting today is what we sort of expect the process to look like in this upcoming year, but this is based on last year's process. The second that we get updated information on, how to apply, when to apply, what projects are eligible, we will share that with everyone that's on here, everyone that we possibly can. What we're sharing today is what we largely expect this process to look like in this upcoming year. So with that, I will go ahead and begin. What is community project funding? So each year, every member of Congress, and it's up to the member of Congress for them to decide whether they choose to participate in the process, is able to solicit and accept 15 projects from the community. In the past, these have been called earmarks, but these are, community-led, community-driven projects that are sort of already being worked on in need of some sort of like gap assistance financing or, sort of additional dollars that they're looking for that they don't necessarily have a source from. These projects, once the member of Congress selects their 15, are then incorporated into the annual government funding bill. So, for example, this past Congress, or this last year, we opened our fiscal year 2023 community project funding process. We selected our 15 projects, and then we incorporated them into the budget bill. For those of you who are following, the federal government, we've been in the last year or so have been trying to pass a federal budget. The lack of passing that budget means that the funding that we included in those for these projects have not yet been dispersed. But once those budgets pass, that's where our funding's included. All right. So some frequently asked questions. These are some high-level points to keep in mind. This is a competitive process. So I like to break up when someone reaches out to our office for assistance with federal funding. There's usually two places that we can direct them to. We can direct them to the existing federal grants. And if you're a nonprofit or a local government, you've probably worked on the federal grants process before. You applied for some kind of federal grant from the Department of Housing and Urban Development or the Department of Transportation. Those are at any given time, there's probably 1,000 federal grants that are out there right now that you could search through and apply for. That's the competitive process that our office doesn't have much role in, other than maybe providing letters of support if you're applying for a grant. The other federal funding that is available are this community project funding, where we are sort of the middlemen of deciding 15 projects. As I said, this is a competitive process. In 2023, we received a little over 50 applications for funding. I expect in this 2024, we'll see more than that. But we receive all 50 projects. We evaluate them, we sort of review them holistically, and we review them based upon a set of guidelines I'll go over. The range of funding last year that the 15 projects received was between $400,000 and $3.5 million. I will say that a lot of the projects requested more than that amount of funding. And after we our office accepted them, we submitted them and the numbers got knocked down a little bit. So you can submit a number, we might accept the project at that submission number, and then ultimately the number might get knocked down a bit, but just as a sort of, framework from which to, get a sense of how much money you can request, the range that, are the projects that were submitted to us ended up getting funded in the range from $400,000 to $3.5 million this past year. Funding from community project funding is almost exclusively for capital expenses. This is not for programmatic, not for operational, or not for planning dollars. This is for, I like to say, like hard physical assets, building acquisition, building renovation, any generally capital expenses that you can think of, equipment, things like that. The Appropriations Committee and the community project funding process is generally not open to programmatic operational or planning expenses. And then finally, any of the projects that we accept or review or go with ultimately have to fall in line with rules and regulations that are provided to us by the House Appropriations Committee. So we accept projects, we review projects, but we don't really set the parameters around what kind of projects are eligible or that we can accept. We're given guidance, and then usually the day that we receive the guidance on what kind of projects are eligible, that's when we open our application and we go live with it, because we want to make sure that we're sharing this information as quickly as possible. But later in these slides, the guidelines that I'll share with you are what I expect are the guidelines that we will see in this upcoming year's process. So the community project funding process is managed and approved by the House Appropriations Committee. The committee provides our office with a set of guidelines that we have to follow, and then we submit the projects that we've received and reviewed based upon those guidelines and requirements. All right, so here are the eligible categories of funding that we saw in 2023. If you don't write all this down, I will share this slide with everyone so you can see it. I will put this on our website, but you'll have access to this. The departments listed are sort of the categories that you can think of what kind of project would make sense to submit. We were able to accept projects this last year, and I expect we will probably be able to accept projects in this upcoming year that fit under, you know, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Justice, Department of Interior, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Transportation. And then within those departments, there are sort of like specific categories where the Appropriations Committee says, okay, these are the kinds of projects that we're able to accept. I will say in our past year's experience, the broadest category and one that we submitted the vast majority of projects under was the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Economic Development Initiative. This is when I was reviewing projects, or when our office was reviewing projects, when we were looking to see how a project could potentially be funded, how it could fit within the rules and regulations. The Economic Development Initiatives category from the Department of Housing and Urban Development had the broadest sort of applicability. This is where building acquisition costs were included. This is where, you know, building renovation, site renovation, really just a broad spectrum of applicable funding sources were allowable. But I'll also point out, for our local government friends that are on here, a lot of road projects were funded under the Department of Transportation. I have a highways category listed there. That's generally roads, but we can accept transit projects. I think Southwest Ohio Regional Transit Authority had a project funded under there. We received a lot of clean drinking water infrastructure projects. I think we had 4 drinking water infrastructure projects in 2023 that fit under EPA funding. But basically, when we receive the updated guidance for this upcoming year, we will share with everyone who's on this call and everyone that we interact with the list of, you know, here's the scope of projects that we can accept. You know, as long as it is capital, as long as it is like as long as it generally fits within the guidelines, we will work with you know, projects to try to frame them in a way that gives them the best chance of success. All right, here's a list, I think, of maybe like 10 of the projects last year that were funded. So we had the City of Cincinnati Central Parkway Complete Street Project, Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing and Affordable Housing Project. The City of South Lebanon has a community center improvement project. SORTA's Bus Stop Enhancement Project. City of Loveland had a water main replacement. Mount Airy Community Redevelopment Authority had a building acquisition and renovation project that they were working on. The Port of Greater Cincinnati Lunkenheimer Site Revitalization is a project in South Fairmount, Cincinnati, where they're redeveloping and cleaning up a former industrial site. 3CDC in Over the Rhine has the Finley Community Center Improvement Project. And then Queen Mother's Market Cooperative is working on establishing a grocery store in Walnut Hills. So these were not all of the projects. I think these are 10 of the 15 projects that were, I wanted to kind of give a range of, you know, these are the sort of projects that we're looking for and that we funded last year. This is not all encompassing. This, you know, the projects that we selected this previous year, you know, it might change in the next year depending on what projects we submit. I've already heard from folks that they're interested in applying for, you know, applying for funding, and it's very different projects than we saw from last year. So this is a range or example of projects that we saw this past year, but this is not a limitation on what we'll accept or fund in the next year. All right, so how do we evaluate projects? So first, as I mentioned, we receive the rules and guidelines that we have to follow. So the first thing that we look for is compliance with House Appropriations committee guidance. We look for level of impact on the community. this is probably one of the biggest things that we're looking for when we're looking at a project. We want to make sure that when we have 15 projects that we're allowed to submit for funding, that the project that we would ultimately approve or accept is a project that will have, a maximum impact on the people in the community. We're looking for things that, whether it's service delivery, whether it is the number of people served, whether it is a gap in some type of service that doesn't exist right now. We're looking for how can we maximize these limited federal dollars to assist the most amount of people and assist the community in the best way possible. Another factor that we consider is project readiness. The community project funding is really aimed at projects that are sort of already somewhat in the works, but need some additional funding. I generally recommend that the community project funding process not spur a new idea that didn't exist previously if it weren't for this process. When we go to submit projects, the Appropriations Committee, they really want to see projects that have some level of funding already there, that there's community support for it, that this is a project that is moving forward, that there's a timeline. It doesn't have to be, ready to go tomorrow. It doesn't have to be fully financed other than the community project funding, but it has to be moving in the right direction. And that's a critical piece that we look for when evaluating a project. Another component is level of community support. The House Appropriations Committee, when we submit projects, will ask us for letters of support from the community that show that this is a project that has buy-in from the community and support of the community. So, when we are soliciting projects, you don't have to immediately provide us a letter of support, but we will ask in our application, do you have community buy-in, or is the mayor, or the city council member, or the county commissioner, or the sheriff, or what nonprofits are you involved with? What community leaders are you involved with? Just so that we have a sense of, is this really a community-driven, a community-led project that will benefit the community? And then a final piece is some level of local funding match. Most projects, most categories of projects have to have some level of local funding match. I think 14 out of our 15 projects last year had funding sources elsewhere than just the community project funding. It's a range, but usually I think it has to be around 20 to 25% of the project itself has funding from a different source besides this community project funding. So if you have a $1 million project, and I'm using examples here, this is not hard set in stone, but if you have a $1 million project and you're coming to us for 500,000 or 750,000, we would like to see that you have $250,000 already in hand or committed for that project in some other source of funding. Okay, the timeline for this community project funding process. These are estimates because we do not yet know for sure when we will receive the guidance from the House Appropriations Committee just yet. But this is what we saw in the previous year, and this is what I would expect the process to look like this year. So we will, usually the day that our office receives the guidance on, what kind of projects are eligible and the requirements, we open the application and post that information, and we'll share that with everyone. It's explaining in very clear detail, here are the kind of projects we accept, here are the requirements, things like that. We expect that'll happen probably around early March of 2024. We're then going to have the application process open, I think, for probably about 2 weeks, and then probably close the application around mid-March of 2024. So we'll give folks about 2 weeks to submit applications. The application process is not, the initial application process is not terribly difficult. We ask for fairly basic information, like the project name, how much funding you already have, the amount of funding that you're looking for, descriptions of the project, and really any information that'll help us evaluate whether this is a project that we want to be able to support. So the application itself, the initial application, is not a terribly difficult process. We then use that information to sort of further evaluate the project. And then if we have an interest in trying to move forward on it, we will follow back up to try to get some more information from you. We will then, after we close the application in mid-March, we're going to take about 2 weeks to review the projects, do some due diligence checks, make sure that, projects meet all of the requirements, that meet the sort of metrics and standards that we're looking for, follow-up questions. And then we expect by early April 24, we'll go ahead and make the announcements of the 15 projects that were selected. So in total, it's about a month-long process from when we open the application to when we ultimately announce the projects. And then finally, this is a key piece to understand. Once we accept a project and submit it to the House Appropriations Committee for their approval, that doesn't guarantee that the project is going to be funded right away. We are, as I mentioned earlier, we're currently in the process where we opened the 2023 process in March of 2023. We announced our projects in April of 2023. And Congress has not yet at this time passed the government funding bills. So we are still waiting for 2023's projects to ultimately be approved and funded. So this funding can take a little while, but we essentially do our best in working with those who are applying to, to refine their proposals, to make sure their projects meet all the requirements. And then ultimately, once we accept the projects and submit them, we'll do everything that we possibly can to make sure that the funding ultimately gets to the organization. Okay, go ahead and take a screenshot of this if you'd like. I'll also send this around. Our website, I will send this around. Our website will, I know this is sort of a difficult link to read, but I'll send this around to you all. We're going to post every piece of information. I'll post this webinar, I'll post the slideshow. And then once we get all of the information on the community project funding process for 2024, once we receive all of the guidance and guidelines, we will post this on our website. Every piece of information that you could possibly need on this process will be on our website. And then if you have questions about this process at any time, the email that we use to respond and check in, and the email that you will receive letting you know that the community project funding process is opening is landsman.appropriations@mail.house.gov. Again, after this webinar, I'll send you all an email with the slideshow. You'll have this email information, you'll have this website, and you can stay in touch and ask questions. But all of the information that you will possibly need for this process will be found on our website. All right. And with that, I am going to invite our friends from the House Appropriations Committee, Ryan and Jason, to join us to share a little bit more. And then I'll take some questions, some high-level questions from folks that we can answer. And if there are questions that we can't answer, we will follow up with you after this webinar.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having us. My name is Jason Gray with the House Appropriations Committee. And we have Ryan Kinney too. Ryan, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I don't think we can.
Yeah. And so I think Chris provided a great overview of the process. If I want to pull it up to a higher level or broader to give it a little bit more context, the committee brought back this process. Well, this is the third year we've been going through it. FY24 will be the fourth year. And last year, about 369 members of Congress participated. That's 85% of House members. So it's great to see that the majority of members are taking advantage of this avenue to provide additional directed resources to their district, with the feeling being that the members working with you all in the community know the district's best and their needs the best and can best advocate for those. So this is largely, in effect, a grant application process working through the member office, as opposed to working directly with an agency or a department of the federal government, which is also a competitive, grant awards announcement process. And this generally mirrors that, where we are looking to evaluate projects that would otherwise already qualify for that programmatic funding. It's just then specified on the front end in the appropriations bill that is where the money is directed to go. So so a lot of the water and sewer projects or the transportation projects that Chris was alluding to, those are things that are eligible, and we work in conjunction with the departments and the agencies to ensure that eligibility on the front end. So as Chris said, we wish this money could have gotten out the door to you by now, but we're still working through that and forever hopeful. And but we've also got this next cycle coming up soon. So I think he's got you prepped really well for the road ahead. I will say too, just as a new member's office coming in and trying to navigate this process, the fact that Representative Landsman and his team were able to get 15 of 15 secured. It just speaks to the amount of work that they put into really driving this up front. So just wanted to underscore that as well. But happy to answer any questions or details on anything. Just wanted to give that context here, and back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Jason. I will, if folks want to like raise their hand on Zoom, if there is a question, I don't know that we'll be able to answer every question during this. We're going to try to focus on sort of high level, broad questions. You can also drop a question in the chat. If we don't get to everything in this time, I will follow up with everyone who does have a question and make sure that we get you an answer. Let's see. If you have a question, I'm not seeing you raise your hand, feel free just to unmute yourself and I'll answer it. And if folks don't have questions, I will be happy to follow up with you after.
Hey, Chris, this is Kate Schroeder with Interact for Health. Hey.
Yes.
Can you remind us the timeline for spending the funding? So for the 15 that get approved.
Yes. Yeah. Jason, I've got a high level answer. I'll start by saying it depends on which category of funding. So in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and I think that like the transportation accounts, it was, I think, usually like 4 to 5 years. Jason, are you able to provide, that generally sounds like a right answer?
Yeah, that's generally right. And yes, it does vary depending on which account. Each program has a different period of availability. So whether we're talking about the Department of Agriculture and some of their programs, or some of the clean water and drinking water projects, those are no-year funding, so that money does not expire. That is an area, and Chris spoke to the fact that there is a match required with that. There's a 20% match that comes with those funds. Yeah, on the thud end, I think it's 3 years of availability, and but then there's additional time for the recipient to expend that funding once it's released from the department and in your hands to execute it. So so it does vary.
Yeah. So okay, I mean, it does vary. I will, if anyone that has projects that they're interested in looking at, if you have questions like that, I can sort of look through the guidance and give you an early sense of how long we think how long it would take how long you have until funding needs to be expended.
Great, thank you.
I don't know that I can see everyone who might have their hand raised. So if you do have a question, feel free to just come off cue.
Chris,
go ahead, Jay.
There are a couple questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to.
Okay.
I can read it to you. One question is, what happens if our request is awarded with an amendment/reduction? Are we able to modify the project?
So that is a question that we will ask you during the application process, is if the funding is reduced from what your request is, are you still going to be able to complete the project? And what that essentially is asking is if you will have other sources of funding that you can use to backfill. So projects should be submitted with the expectation that there's a possibility that what you request isn't either funded or isn't fully funded.
Another question in the chat, is there a sample application we could review? If so, where can we access it?
Yes, I can send that as a sample with the expectation that this was last year, so that you have a sense of what the application looks like, but know that like this isn't the application for this year, but just so you can get a sense of like what kind of questions we will be looking for in the initial application.
And then are there land acquisition costs, are land acquisition costs an eligible expense for economic development initiatives? And then also another question, are land acquisition costs available for transportation, trail infrastructure projects?
Yes, land acquisition, site redevelopment costs are eligible projects under the Department of Housing and Urban Developments category. The second part of that question, Brad, I will have to check on whether site acquisition is an allowable expense for infrastructure projects. I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head. Feel free to drop. I think this might just be easier. If you do have questions, you can come off mute or drop it in the chat and I'll answer. I'll just give it a minute. If there aren't additional questions, I will go ahead and wrap this up and send all of the information that we have shared today and all the other information with you via email. Also just say, we really appreciate everyone's interest in this. And we really look forward to working with you. We're going to be a resource. We're going to share all of the information that we have. Basically, we will try to get this updated information to you as quickly as we have it, and we will answer questions and be a resource and availability for you as you guys have questions. But really appreciate everyone who joined here today, taking the time to learn more about this process. All right, and with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a good Friday and good weekend.